I'd like to welcome you all to this panel discussion of whether the left should support Bernie Sanders. We have a very representative panel here of different viewpoints. Our speakers tonight are Regina Johnson, Kaylee Barrett, Alex Shantz, and Steve Early. And Regina's going to be speaking first. She's a member of the International Socialist Organization. She's written a series of articles on the California drought and on indigenous movements in the United States. She'll be speaking at the Eco-Socialist Conference in Los Angeles next weekend, I believe.
Santa Barbara. Yeah.
Okay, and she's going to put out the ISO's position on the Bernie Sanders campaign, so please welcome her.
Okay.
How's everyone doing tonight? Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay, I'm going to try to project. So this week, Bernie Sanders spoke at his alma mater at the University of Chicago, and among other things, he argued that I agree with. He said real change comes from below. But Sanders also pointed out that despite enormous gains made due to the past social movements, the top 1/10 of the 1% of society now owns more than the bottom 90% of the U.S. population. This wealth shift to the top has caused immiseration for those at the bottom of U.S. society. And Sanders' campaign has highlighted this inequality as the basis of all the crises that we see around us for the rest of us. Stagnating, if not abysmal, wages, attacks on women's reproductive choices, lack of access to health care and child care, skyrocketing housing costs, trillions of dollars in student debt, a war on black people in terms of what Michelle Alexander has coined the new Jim Crow. And on top of this, we see extreme weather due to climate change and ongoing wars and military intervention. So Sanders' campaign has injected some life into what would have been a pretty ludicrous election season with two dynasties. You know, you could see it in a movie, series, squaring off, U.S. Capitol. The Clintons versus the Bushes, with quite a bit of vile, bigoted Donald Trump action on the side. Although I would say Jeb Bush is trying to outdo Trump's racism. This last week, Jeb talked about how black people just want some free stuff. So Sanders, instead, is drawing from the sentiment of Occupy around class inequality and has put important demands that would better the conditions for millions of people in the United States. And yes, get us some more free stuff. Or just get back some of the wealth that's actually been stolen from us. So Bernie says we need an economy that works for the majority, not just for the 1%. And his campaign is focused on living wages, equal pay for women and people of color, democracy in elections, stopping climate change, single-payer health care, and on, and he wants to do this by taxing the rich. So Sanders' mass rallies show that there's also a growing audience open to discussing the fact that socialism does have a solution to ending the crisis we see here for working people and people of color. So we agree with Bernie that we need a political revolution, but it's also important to say we need a social one as well. You only have to look at the crisis for African Americans and Latinos and women, where structural racism, sexism, and LGBT oppression is so deeply rooted in this system to understand how much we need to upend the whole thing and change social relations completely. So despite everything I just laid out on how much I agree with him, why am I going to stand here and argue that socialists and the left shouldn't support his campaign? So it's not about having a litmus test. It's not about having some master sheet that says we agree with this, and we don't agree with that, and we don't agree with that, and that's why we can't support him. Much of what Sanders puts forward is what Ralph Nader argued for in 2000 when the ISO supported his campaign and he ran for the Green Party ticket. So it's not about Sanders as an individual, I would argue, or even about his radical or progressive resume. I'm including his history regarding the labor movement, which Steve Early knows a lot more about than I do. I think it's about the fact that he is running in a party controlled by the corporate and political class, and when Sanders calls for taking on the billionaire class, that class's interests are represented by both the Republican and Democratic parties. So we have to confront these two contradictions. Sanders is running in the Democratic primary, which is owned by the 1%, and then he promises to support whoever the party's nominee is, even if it is Clinton. rather than building an independent left-wing political alternative and campaign. Drinking water doesn't take away from my time, does it? Okay, so number one, I don't think the left should support Bernie Sanders because he's running in the Democratic Party. I think we must understand our two-party system is a duopoly. Together, the Republicans and Democrats form an institution. These parties are bankrolled by Wall Street and the owners of corporations. And together, these two parties keep the system functioning for the 1%, which means they just keep the system churning out profits at the expense of the rest of us. Both Democrats and Republicans are beholden to the corporations who fund their campaigns and the corporations who come knocking on their doors and depend on the economic policies set by the legislation that these representatives vote on. So the Republican Party, I think, is seen as the A-team. They are the go-to, talk straight, talk shit, party, big party for capital. But in times when the ruling class's sham of a democracy is put in jeopardy, the Democrats are used as the B team. They are the backup plan to pull the discontented back into the folds. And at this point in history, I think the Dems are actually plan A for big business and maintaining corporate interests. You only have to look at what happened under Obama's 2 presidencies. Profitability was restored for the ruling class in the 1%, and this was done at the expense of climate change, attacks on workers' rights, and on unions, thereby lowering the standard of living for the rest of us. Also, the Democratic Party opposes and has acted against Sanders' best positions. This we must understand. So some supporters of Sanders would argue that his campaign can get past all of these facts and these obstacles because Sanders is collecting small donations and he will not be susceptible to these corporate corruption and interests. But I think we have to consider the structures and power behind how U.S. elections are won. How democratic is the Democratic Party? What does it mean that the superdelegates have such a role on Super Tuesday? And I think there's one point in history that's really good that I will stress. One of the best examples of the corruption and the lack of democracy is in 1934 during the general strike in San Francisco when Upton Sinclair, he bid for the governorship of California for the Democratic Party. And I'm going to read quickly from the Democrats of Critical History by Lance Selfa. It's outside. He said, in 1934, the radical novelist Upton Sinclair actually won the Democratic primary for the governorship in California on a progressive platform to end poverty in California during the Depression decade. Sinclair proposed for the state to take over idle factories and farmland and to turn them into cooperatives. He also proposed a levy an income tax, a state income tax on corporations. Did the Democratic establishment, including Franklin Roosevelt, the president at the time, show loyalty to the Democrats' democratically elected candidate? No. Democratic big business money shifted to the Republican candidate and formed a one-time third party to siphon away votes from Sinclair. Anyways, in the end, the Republicans actually won. So, now getting back to the second contradiction of the Sanders campaign. Why has Sanders stated in the end he will support Clinton? We have to also talk about why Sanders has not criticized the Democratic Party as a party, nor Clinton, and he has not even criticized Obama. I think Sanders actually has a history of not wanting to be a spoiler, and this is what he's actually talked about in supporting the candidate in the end. He also didn't support Nader. So I think that the reality is important to consider for the left, that Sanders sees the Democratic Party as a vehicle for achieving demands of the 99%, while that party has shifted to the right over the last 20 years and has actually participated in dismantling gains from past movements, including the union movement. So if Sanders loses and throws his support to the neoliberal hack, Hillary Clinton, I think this actually damages the political development of the left in this country. So ultimately, the role of the Democratic Party, how it is used to cut the legs out from under the left and organized labor, has not gone away despite Sanders is running as a social democrat and it is as an independent. The Democrats corral and then become a dead end for social movements. We had John reporting for Duty Kerry that demobilized the anti-war movement. People were told our movement had to support him as a lesser evil to Bush. And now I think Sanders' campaign is going to corral the Occupy sentiment and the social forces who are upset with the system, and his role is to actually bring those folks back into the fold of the mainstream political establishment. So even still, there's a strong sentiment that Bernie's campaign will pull the Democrats to the left. But I think that the Dems can speak to the left. This is what they do. Just remember Obama. He gave this amazing civil rights speech and the gains that were made actually from the Black Power movement. And then there was a movement in this country for Black Power once again. And what has he actually done to meet those demands of the people who've been marching on the streets and standing up against police violence? So I think instead of the left changing the Democratic Party changes them. And this is true of Bernie, too. I'm getting close on time, but people should read what Howard Dean has said about him. He basically says that Bernie is a liberal Democrat. He runs as an independent because he doesn't like the structure and money that gets involved. But the bottom line is that Bernie Sanders votes with the Democrats 99% of the time. I think that's important. So lastly, I do want to say that while I agree with many of Bernie's platform, it's important to say that there's positions he's taken that I don't agree with. I disagree with his votes for continuing war funding. I disagree with his support of Israel and position on Palestine. And I disagree with him being okay with drones. And his position on China is also quite problematic. But even still, if Sanders were running outside of the Democratic Party to pose a real alternative, we as the ISO may very well have supported him while arguing critically and putting forward our demands around what I just described. So to wrap up, I think we need to end, the argument I want to end with is that I think we need to build our own independent alternative. We need to continue the project of organizing independent and explicit socialist political organizations. We need to create, cohere, and continue the hard work of building social movements and working class organizations that are separate from the two parties to achieve the aims we agree on. And we need to build the left. This is the only way to help the development of working class consciousness, the politics and social forces needed to achieve the platform that Sanders is putting forward. I would quote Debs, but I'll come back to that later. But I will say, in the spirit of Debs, I think we should actually support Jill Stein's Green Party nomination for presidency because she's actually a genuine break from the two-party systems. I don't think we should join Sanders' campaign, but instead we should work alongside each other in many of the struggles that are happening in the Bay Area to build an alternative. And lastly, I just want to say thanks to Kaylee, Steve, and Alex. I think these sort of debates and discussions are actually what's needed to move the left forward in this country.
Okay, thanks, Regina, for the debate. So our next speaker is Kaylee Barrett. She's one of the lead organizers for the Bay Area for Bernie, which is a grassroots organization dedicated to building grassroots support for Bernie. Sorry about that. She spent the last decade working on environmental and international development organizations. Please welcome her.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm really excited that this conversation is happening. Let me begin by stating the obvious. There is a groundswell of support for Bernie Sanders' campaign, more than I think anybody expected, not least of all Bernie himself. You've heard about the eye-popping attendance figures for West Coast rallies over the summer in Seattle, Portland, LA, Houston, Madison, Wisconsin. Tonight, this evening, Bernie just gave a speech in Boston that drew an expected 15,000 people. I couldn't find a confirmed number, but that's what was expected. And this week, the Sanders campaign released eye-popping fundraising totals for the quarter. $26 million in the past 3 months alone. That's just 2 or 3 million shy of Hillary. More than 1 million donations, with an average donation just under $25. For the past 2.5 months, I've been working with Bay Area for Bernie to organize local volunteers in support of this campaign. People from all walks of life are getting involved. Parents of young children, students, immigrants who can't vote but can volunteer, unemployed folks, retired folks, tech workers, dog walkers, teachers, nurses, union members. Some have deep roots in the progressive movement in the Bay Area and beyond. Some may have dabbled in political activism, maybe went to a phone bank for Obama. And many, probably the majority of the people that I've met in Bay Area for Bernie have never been involved in politics before. I don't have to tell you what a big opportunity that is. In the process of learning about Bernie, many of these Bernie supporters are seriously considering socialism for the first time. And I'm one of them. I attended my first socialist event a couple of weeks ago because fellow Bernie supporters invited me. So I studied economics in college. I'm familiar with some of the basic ideas, and I've done quite a bit of reading to prepare for this panel. But let me be clear, like so many Bernie supporters, I'm new at this. And I think that's something to celebrate. I don't have to tell you how socialism has kind of a bad rap in this country. And I think that so many people are opening to this idea for the first time. I'm hoping that I can provide some insight into how this feels for newcomers. And I hope to learn. I've already learned some from Regina's talk, and I expect to learn much more. So far, the biggest concern that I've heard from Regina and from others is that Bernie chose to run on the Democratic ticket. His campaign will ultimately benefit the Democratic Party, which will, gladly accept his supporters and reject the content of his message. But I think that that's not the whole story. For one thing, it presupposes that Bernie is going to lose, which I don't think is a foregone conclusion. I think Bernie can win. I think also that it underestimates the strength of the grassroots movement that is growing to support the official Bernie Sanders campaign. Bay Area for Bernie exists in part because the official campaign hasn't been able to expand their capacity fast enough to keep up with the explosion of grassroots support. The official campaign provides us with some basic tools. There's an event hub on the BernieSanders.com website, a set of approved, downloadable, full-page flyers. But for the most part, we're doing this ourselves. Bernie supporters are figuring out how to campaign, designing promotional materials, figuring out how to get them printed in ways that comply with the FEC, which is very difficult. Navigating the other onerous anti-grassroots regulations of the FEC and making connections among ourselves. Let me give you an example of what this looks like. And again, I'm new at this, so maybe all political campaigns are run this way. I kind of doubt it. You can let me know. There's a Bernie volunteer in San Jose named Paul Huntley. He's a great guy. We've been working together closely. I've never even met him in person. And he happens to know somebody who's a field organizer in Iowa. Through his friend, Paul was able to get call sheets and scripts used by local volunteers in Iowa and set up a phone bank for folks in San Jose, with the approval of his field organizer friend, not necessarily from the campaign on high. Now there are phone banks in Santa Clara, San Jose, Oakland, and San Francisco. At some point, the campaign may build the infrastructure to open phone banking to the early primary states at a large scale. But in the meantime, we're making thousands of calls every week. If you'd like to join the San Francisco phone banks, quick plug, every Sunday 3 to 6, I would love to see you. Other grassroots groups are spearheading other phone banks, some completely independent of the campaign, others coordinated in some way or other. Sometimes we're going completely beyond the campaign and their agenda, taking a more aggressive stance than Bernie himself. And sometimes we're learning the hard way about the challenges of operating within the Democratic Party. I think the best example of this is the fight to get more primary debates for the Democratic Party.
Right, yeah.
Sounds like a lot of you know about this, but for those of you who don't, the chairperson of the Democratic National Committee is Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She was Clinton's campaign chair in 2008, and she is, it is widely assumed, it is obvious that the debate schedule is designed to help Clinton and reinforce the idea that this primary is a coronation rather than a contest. Debates can only raise the profile of her opponents, give Clinton the opportunity to make damaging gaffes. It's all downside for Clinton. It's all upside for Bernie. The more people that hear his message, the more people are going to wake up and support him. So, the nitty-gritty. For 2016, the DNC has followed the Republican lead and forbid candidates from participating in unsanctioned debates, or else they will be excluded from these 6 official debates. The Republicans have already debated twice. The first Democratic debate won't be until October 13th. That's a week from Wednesday. It's a date so late that it's after the voter registration deadline for the primary in New York State. That's why a grassroots group in New York has organized a phone bank to let people know that they need to register. Subsequent debates have been scheduled for high-profile times, like the Sunday evening before Christmas, or the Sunday of Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. So Bernie supporters are pissed. Bernie himself is taking sort of a diplomatic stance and saying that he thinks that more debates would be great. He's happy to debate anybody, anytime. Meanwhile, his supporters in the Bay Area are calling Debbie Wasserman Schultz, calling the state representative or state DNC chair, calling Obama. He is technically her boss. We're on social media. They're at an event in New Hampshire a few weeks ago. A group of protesters made headlines by disrupting Wasserman Schultz's speech. And a protest is planned outside the first Democratic debate in Las Vegas. To some of you, the blatant favoritism in the DNC is no surprise. For me, I'll be honest, it was. And I think that this is a learning experience for Bernie supporters. And I think that those of you who have more experience trying to make change within the major parties have a lot to offer those of us who are new at this, who are excited and maybe a little bit naive. What lessons can we draw from the campaigns of candidates like Eugene McCarthy, George McGovern, and Jesse Jackson? How are these campaigns similar to Bernie's, and how are they different? How can we avoid making some of the same mistakes that they did? Bernie may be running in the Democratic primary, but this political revolution is not happening within the Democratic primary. It's only partially happening within Bernie's own campaign. Bernie may have pledged his loyalty to the eventual Democratic candidate, but his supporters have not made such a pledge. In improv, there's a powerful concept known as yes and. If another actor says, "How's the sandwich?" you don't argue, "What sandwich? I'm eating an ice cream cone." You say, "It's wonderful. Bologna and cream cheese is my favorite. Do you want some?" In the Bay Area, Bernie supporters are saying yes and to Bernie's candidacy. Bernie himself has said that he will need a strong grassroots movement to support him after the election in order to achieve the goals that we all believe in the face of a recalcitrant Congress and the billionaire interests of all stripes. Bernie's election would not be the end of our activism, but the beginning. Members of Bay Area for Bernie are very conscious of this. We formed a PAC called EPIC, Empowering Progressive Initiatives and Candidates. And while Bay Area for Bernie as an organization is focused on this campaign, EPIC is taking a wider view and trying to build an infrastructure that will be in place long after the campaign, no matter how it ends up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really want to thank our speakers for their discipline because it's very impressive. Okay, so next we have Alex Chance. Alex is the co-coordinator of the Green Party of California, and he also serves on the St. Helena Unified School District's Board of Trustees. Please give him hands.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the International Socialist Organization for allowing me to be on this panel and for organizing this event. I think this is really important. I'm also impressed so far. It seems like this is going to be a really cordial discussion. My ex-girlfriend and I weren't able to have quite as cordial discussions when dealing with these issues, so hopefully this ends up a little bit better for all of us. So
you broke up over Bernie?
No. That's another panel for another time. So. Anyways, my name is Alex Chance. I serve as a co-coordinator for the Green Party of California. I also serve on the St. Helena Unified School District Board of Trustees, and I'm actually one of thousands of Green Party activists that have run for office around the country, and one of nearly 1,000 that have actually won. Although fortunately my election was uncontested, so that. but point remains nonetheless. Anyways, I like to think that I'm someone that practices what I preach in terms of building a political base and movement by getting Greens elected into office. My bottom line position tonight is that socialists and other radicals need to build a lasting political alternative that is not controlled by corporate money and is committed to a truly progressive and radical agenda for social justice, socialism, and radical change. And insofar as this political alternative expresses itself in the electoral realm, it's necessary to build a lasting political structure that can run candidates and win elections. So it's an electoral alternative. And I believe the Green Party is best positioned to be this political alternative, particularly in the electoral realm. And I think it's also worth mentioning that the Green Party is now one of two of the longest running truly national left-wing mass political parties in U.S. history. Before talking about Bernie Sanders, I did want to first say that Bernie is someone I've always admired throughout the years as I've become politically aware. I always saw him as an exemplar of progressive and independent politics. I admired him for being an openly socialist member of Congress, and that would often attack the Democratic Party because of the influence that big money and corporations had on it. And this is why I was personally very disappointed when Bernie decided to run as a Democrat. In my own view, it felt like it rendered a lot of his political work as an independent and as a socialist sterile. And I think if Bernie was really trying to build a lasting political alternative, he would have ran as a Green and built it that way. So I believe Bernie's campaign takes momentum away from building a truly progressive and radical political alternative, because his campaign is going to bring people into the fold of the Democratic Party instead of into a lasting alternative political structure like the Green Party. We only have to look at history to see what happened to Jesse Jackson, to Dennis Kucinich, even Howard Dean. History's been really clear that you can't change the Democratic Party from within. The Democratic Party is where progressive politics go to die. Because what it does is it absorbs these insurgent campaigns, these well-meaning insurgent campaigns, into the establishment, while the party as a whole just marches further to the right. So from a purely tactical and strategic standpoint, I think putting energy into changing the Democratic Party from within is not effective. Thank you. Awkward, like. I would also like to suggest that I don't think Bernie does have a chance of winning the Democratic nomination. I'm friends with several leaders on several levels within the Democratic Party, and rank-and-file Democrats don't particularly like him. And the second reason I think this is most important is the Democratic Party's presidential nomination process includes superdelegates, and superdelegates are comprised of current and former elected officials like congressmen, governors. Currently, I believe there are about 747 of the 5,083 delegates are superdelegates. So, what are superdelegates? Unlike regular delegates, superdelegates are not required to represent the popular vote of a particular region for the Democratic primary. Superdelegates can basically vote for whoever they want. And they can effectively serve as a kill switch by tilting the scales to prevent progressive candidates like Bernie from receiving the presidential nomination. And I just think, realistically, even if Bernie, it's not going to be a landslide. I mean, by the time the election rolls around, it's going to be close, if anything. And so the superdelegates really are going to play a decisive role. And if you look historically, that's one of the reasons why they were created in the first place. It was to ensure that, more people basically from the politician class, were the candidates that were going up ahead. So I would like, in all sincerity, like the Bernie supporters out there, I mean, I want you to explain how is Bernie going to get the nomination with zero support from superdelegates. So I hope that question comes back later on in this debate. It's also just, this has already been stated before, but Bernie's also said that if he loses, he's going to put his support behind Hillary or whoever the progressive Democratic candidate happens to be. And this obviously puts momentum into building a corporate political party, the Democratic Party, instead of an alternative. And I kind of skip through that because you touched on that really nicely. But again, I feel like that's another question that Bernie supporters really need to speak to. How does throwing your support behind Hillary or a corporate Democrat really do anything to build a real political, progressive, radical alternative in this country? And also, I think it's worth thinking hypothetically, what if Bernie did receive the nomination and even won the presidency? What would that mean? And even if that happened, there still would be a need to build a true political, radical alternative outside the Democratic Party. And many aspects of the strategy to build the Green Party as a political alternative wouldn't change. For example, it still wouldn't make sense to vote for Bernie in California because California is a blue state. Just to kind of give an example, in 2012, Obama won California by 2.9 million votes. If 500,000 progressives had voted Green instead, Obama still would have won by a landslide, but an actual message would have been sent, and it also helps to build a true electoral alternative. So a socialist vote for Obama, Sanders, or any Democrat in California that's throwing away your vote. Yeah, and also this is kind of fun to think about, but if Bernie did get elected, Congress wouldn't support his progressive agenda, and it would still be necessary to get Greens elected into Congress because they could help him implement some of the things that he's saying he supports. And then we could also expect people from within his party to turn on him. I think kind of what's happening to Corbyn in the United Kingdom is sort of an example of that. How much time do I have?
You are at 7.5 minutes.
Okay. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about what it means in practical terms to build a radical political alternative through the Green Party. To me, this strategy involves a strong focus on building the party at a local grassroots level. It's easier to enact progressive change at a local level than it is statewide or federal. It's about offering an electoral voice within the halls of power to the social movements on the streets, fighting for justice, democracy, the environment, socialism. So it's really, it's an inside-outside strategy, and you need the social movements on the streets to do that. I would point to the work that's been done in cities like Richmond by former mayor and current city council member Gail McLaughlin as an example of what can happen when we get Greens elected locally. Just a couple of the things that she was able to help do is use eminent domain to keep banks from kicking people out of their homes, and she also helped establish a co-op business incubator to support the creation of worker co-ops. In Fairfax, which at one point had a Green Party majority on their city council, they have basically effectively banned corporate chains from opening up. They have established community currency, and I believe they were the second city to ban plastic bags. We've also seen Green city council majorities in Arcata, Sebastopol, and currently our highest office holder is Dan Hamburg, who is a county supervisor in Mendocino. So just point is, getting Greens elected into local office, that's how we build, real political power. With that said, though, it's still important to run Greens for higher office, including the presidency, because that's how you build visibility, it's how you build consciousness, it's how you grow your members, get people registered. But beyond that, there are some real practical things that running a presidential candidate does that might not seem sexy, but it's necessary work for actually building a political alternative. So just a couple examples. If a Green receives 5% of the vote, excuse me, if the Green Party presidential candidate receives 5% of the vote, the party qualifies for federal matching funds, so that would be a huge deal. And if the candidate receives 2% of the vote, then the party would automatically have ballot status in most states. And that's huge because each state have their own rules governing ballot status. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you for your time.
And I'm sorry that I mispronounced your last name.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Okay, so last but not least, we have Steve Early. He is a volunteer for Labor for Bernie. He's a member of the Newspaper Guild, the Communication Workers of America, Local 39521. He's also a prolific writer on topics involving the labor movement and progressive left politics, and we have his book here, Save Our Unions. It's on the table, which is now outside. But if you want to read an excellent analysis of what's going on in labor in the United States today, this is the book to read. So please welcome Steve Early.
Thank you so much. You don't know how wonderful it is to be in a room full of people who are younger. How many people here are under 30? Under 35. We'll raise still, you. I've known you in Boston for more than 35 years. You're not under 35. How many people are unionized teachers? I know the ISO has a great network. Other union members, past or present? Okay, all right. I'm going to focus my glass half full rather than glass half empty remarks on Labor for Bernie, following in the spirit of Kaylee's great presentation about this surge of volunteerism and grassroots initiative. I just came from a 2.5-hour forum on this exact same topic with a mixture of progressive Democrats, DSAers, your comrades in the Green Party, and a whole bunch of old-time Peace and Freedom Party members. There wasn't a person in the bar, you know, the Starry Plow over there in Telegraph in Berkeley, under 50. And there were 60 people at the meeting. The only young person was the bartender, feeling the burn. I had to listen to a lot of people who've been giving the same angry, denunciatory speech for 40 years. And the irony of that, as Brother Alan Benjamin knows, is that our friend Bernie Sanders has been doing the same thing. I first met Bernie in 1976 when he was giving almost word for word the same speech that he gives today, minus the reference to the billionaire class, a social category that had yet to be invented. In 1976, Bernie, was running for the 4th time for statewide office in the great state of Vermont on the Liberty Union Party ticket. And, in typical, sad, marginal third-party fashion, and I say that as a one-time Liberty Union volunteer, as Alan was, Bernie could never crack 3, 4, 5% in any of those races. He could not, attract labor support. And my respect for Bernie grows out of working with him over those 40 years, a lot of the time in a capacity that I retired from 4 or 5 years ago as a national organizer for the communication workers in the Northeast. We had a lot of CWA members in the New England states and telephone workers in Vermont who greatly benefited from solidarity relationships with Bernie. During the 8 years that he was mayor of Burlington and during the 24 years since when he was an 8-term member of Congress and now twice elected to the U.S. Senate. And I dealt with a lot of these scumbag Democrats. I hate them as much as you do. Never voted for one in any presidential election since 1972. I have an unblemished record of casting pure protest symbolic votes that left very little behind, I would say. But, I had to deal with a lot of Democrats, big-name liberal Democrats. They were phony friends of labor, no doubt about it. Bernie was one of the only people who was proactive in his support for workers' struggles. And used his office as mayor, as congressman, as senator in really unusual fashion to support private and public sector union bargaining and organizing in Vermont. And as a result of that, over time, the space that his independent progressive campaigns created for the Vermont Progressive Party means that today, after 25 years of bottom-up building work, the Vermont Progressive Party, which you can read more about in that book, which I just happened to bring some copies of, is the most successful third party in the country today. It has 9 or 10 people in the state legislature. No other third party can boast that degree of electoral success. It has elected the mayor of Burlington for most of the last 35 years, though not recently. It has some great young activists now representing about 1/3 of the city council in Burlington. It is a dues-paying membership organization that now has a 2nd or 3rd generation of young radicals in Vermont, many of them from Vermont unions. And I personally spent many years trying to persuade my union, the CWA, to do more to support third-party efforts anywhere in New England. I worked very hard through Jill Stein's 4 Massachusetts campaigns between 2002 and 2010 to get more union support for her. I was never able to do it. running the way she ran, as wonderful a woman as she is. But in Vermont, we were able, over time, to get all the major unions really behind the Vermont Progressive Party, and it was because of the example of Bernie running as independent progressive, as an open socialist, winning, and then showing people that he could do things in office to help support workers' struggles. So it's a very unusual situation there, and I think is one of the reasons why in our Labor for Bernie network, New England is overrepresented. The people who have had the most contact and interaction with him really understand that the solidarity that he has shown for labor has to be reciprocated, that we all have our principles, and some of us, me included, would have preferred that he run for governor of Vermont, help build the Vermont Progressive Party that way next year. But he chose to do what he did, and he's doing it in a way, I should point out, that is helping to build local independent political organization. I'm very involved in the Richmond Progressive Alliance. I helped get Bernie to come 2 weeks before our big showdown with Chevron last fall. Bernie did a rally with 500 people, no longer, looks big, in light of this recent turnout, raised thousands of dollars for us, both for the Progressive Alliance and for our Team Richmond candidates, and helped us, stage the biggest campaign rally in the 10-year history of the progressive movement, which has not been a green-branded movement, I should point out, brother. The RPA is a coalition of Greens, Peace and Freedom Party people, God love them, independents, socialists, black and Latino Democrats. It's a broad tent, and that's why it has won 8 out of the 12 city council and mayoral elections that it has contested in the last 11 years. Gail, if she had tried to build an organization just with the green brand in Richmond, I can assure you it would not have been anywhere near as successful. So I strongly urge an ecumenical approach. I belong to 3 socialist organizations myself, have friendly relations with 2 more, and I am a member, this is a little-known fact, of Jill Stein's Green Shadow Cabinet. Did you know that we have one? I am the director of the Workers' Power Administration. Sounds like a little political fantasy baseball, but when people ask, I try to help. Anybody who has a shortage of workplace power in your workplace, see me after the meeting, we'll see what my administration can do. In the real world, here's what Labor for Bernie is doing. We started, before the AFL convention, to kick those useless bureaucrats in the butts. We had 1,000 people sign up just in July as public sponsors, endorsers. I figured, oh, God, I'm going to know these people. They've been going to Labor Notes conferences since 1980. I looked at that list, and I knew a handful of people. It was a signal, as Kaylee said, that this was not the usual suspects. 30 to 40% of them were building trades people. By Labor Day, we had 5,000 public endorsers on that list. This is a volunteer committee, kind of initiative you so beautifully described. We're now up to 8,000. We control the list, not the campaign. And the campaign, meanwhile, since they've signed up 650,000 donors, giving an average of $31 apiece, 1.3 million times, we've been able to identify 10% of that group, 650,000 strong, who are union members. We had a town meeting conference call, a call-in a few weeks ago. We had 27,000 union members on it. Wow. Half-hour-long thing. The Hillary Bernie thing, and I'm running out of time, is an incredible wedge issue for people in unions, particularly the AFT right now and the NEA affiliates, who want to raise some hell around what's wrong with our top-down, undemocratic union endorsement procedures for not just presidential candidates, but all the people in politics that we shovel our dues money to and give endorsements to without any rank-and-file input. So if you look at the list of recent Labor for Bernie endorsers, you see there's a very diverse group of local unions. The National Nurses United is the largest one that has signed on. Others have been held off by membership pressure. And if you take a look at a couple of these recent articles, this is teacher-oriented stuff. The president of the AFT nationally, and now apparently the president of the NEA, making the same mistake, trying to rush through endorsements of Hillary, are running into thousands of their own members, protesting, fighting back, questioning it, organizing it. And this surge of kind of independent rank-and-file activity is going to carry on beyond wherever Bernie ends up. We're going to have a great list to build the biggest and best ever Labor Notes Conference in Chicago next April. We're going to use this Labor for Bernie turnout list because we have hundreds, actually now thousands of people not part of the labor left, not part of the labor notes milieu, not previously identified as dissidents in their own union, who as a result of this experience of fighting for and on behalf of Bernie, who has done so much for rank and file union members over the years, that they're now questioning, the direction of their own unions in politics, which is an opening for everybody, third-party people, people that want to reform the Democratic Party, whatever. Bernie has caucused with the Democrats to get things done. Right? When you're elected as a mayor of your state's largest city, when you're elected as a congressman, you're elected as a senator, it's not, people don't want you to just go down there and make speeches. They want you to occasionally try to do some things for them. And, sitting by yourself in a corner, you don't get much done. Back to my friend Gail McLaughlin. If she had not coalesced with non-Greens, including registered Democrats, the two fellow members of her Team Richmond slate last fall, plus a fourth non-RPA member recently, we would not have been the first city in 30 years to enact rent control, which, of course, the Landlords Association is trying to undo and repeal. So, in defense of Bernie's pragmatism, he has actually gotten a few things done for people, and it's widely respected in Vermont. He's running ahead in the polls in Vermont, not only among Democrats, of course, progressives, and independents, but he's tied at 12% with Carson and Trump among registered Republicans. And that's a testament to his homegrown crossover repeal. May not carry over to too many other states, but an impressive statistic nevertheless. This notion that he's not our kind of socialist or the right socialist, or he just talks about Scandinavia, I'm with Kaylee. Socialism is a brand, if you want to use that dreadful marketing term, has been pretty discredited for a long time. If it weren't, the ISO would have 10,000 members instead of whatever is the membership, maybe a party secret. But you know what I'm saying, right? We've had a hard time signing people up, whether it was DSA or Socialist Alternative or ISO or whatever. Now we've got somebody out there, rightly or wrongly, identified in every newspaper article as a socialist, doesn't run away for that, gives an explanation in the mass media about what that means to him. That falls short for many people in this room.
30 seconds.
He's identified in every poll when people ask for a word. What do you associate with Bernie Sanders? They say socialist, better than what they associate with Hillary. He's on the front page of Time magazine, and the headline is, "Socialize this." I mean, he's rejuvenating our label. Now, if you can put more revolutionary meaning into it and build a third-party organization that is something other than the sad, marginal, network of Green Party groups that I've been involved with, and we should talk more about that if we're going to be honest here, mazel tov. But in the meantime, let's be thankful that somebody is spreading our message broadly defined.
Do you want to come back as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, just to speak, I'm absolutely aware of the role that the Richmond Progressive Alliance played in Gail's election, and I think that's a model of how Greens need to work in coalition with other people to get elected. So I didn't touch on that specifically in my remarks, but that's what I was sort of getting at when I said it's about tying electoral action with social movements on the streets. So absolutely agree with that. I guess I wanted to speak a little bit about how do we get Jill Stein more recognition, and that's a huge challenge. I think, and this also kind of feeds into this idea of, is it an either or, is there a way to work together? And I think that there's going to be a lot more opportunities for her campaign after the primary, assuming Sanders doesn't get it. But I think at that point, people will kind of reevaluate and will probably jump on board with Stein's campaign. And yeah, so just some personal experience. So Jill Stein's created a group called Young Greens Rising, which is sort of the student branch of the campaign. And I was phone banking a couple days ago, and the first person I called was a guy from Alaska, and I asked him, how's campus organizing going? And he was like, well, everyone I know, they're all supporting Bernie. So I don't know. And same with this other woman. She was on board, and then she felt like what she really needed to do right now was just support Sanders. And all I really had to say to them was, I don't understand. After the primary is over, let's get back in touch and see if things change. So I think that's a part of how we need to look at this as well.
Thank you. Taylor, do you want to go?
I heard, I'm afraid I can't remember who said what, but somebody mentioned about Obama and how a lot of this new energy is reminding them of Obama. And I'd like to draw a little bit of a contrast. Obama was coming after Bush, and it was a big change. I mean, not as big as it could have been, but it felt like a big change. And Obama was kind of a blank slate. We could project whatever we wanted onto him. He didn't have much of a record. He had a biography. He had oratory skills. Bernie has a record. He's been saying the same thing, since before I was born. There's something there that people are being drawn to. I don't deny that, we have these moments where people get excited and then, it kind of fades. Maybe it doesn't come out as well as we wanted it to. But that doesn't mean that it's not important. That doesn't mean it's not an opportunity. You asked whether Bernie's a socialist. I am not the person to answer that.
No, I said he's not.
Well, I think I was upfront that I am new to the socialist movement. But what I will say is that, there is room for dissent among Bernie supporters. We're not all going to agree 1,000%. Yesterday, he announced Arturo Carmona as his new Latino outreach director and Southwest political director. And one of the things that really struck me that Arturo said is that I am absolutely not going to stop being an activist. He said that he had never envisioned himself participating in a political campaign, and that just because he was working for the Bernie Sanders campaign doesn't...
Sorry. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, doesn't mean that he's going to stop pushing for what he believes in. A lot of what Bernie does, is in alignment, and for the part that doesn't, that's still on the table. Lastly, just to touch on the superdelegates, I don't know what the answer is, but we're working on it. Superdelegates are people. They are susceptible to pressure. If we build the kind of movement that I think we're capable of building, they'll be forced to comply. Finally, just to conclude, and I acknowledge, we've got to do some strategizing about that. I don't have the answer yet, but I think it is possible to get an answer. And to conclude, I think that the third-party politics, involves a lot of protest votes. And I think there may be kind of an assumption that that's what this is. But what if your support made the difference in getting Bernie elected? What if you participating, socialists participating, third-party politics coming together in a coalition to support Bernie as a one-time thing, not joining the Democrats, what if that was enough to push Bernie over the edge? It's not just a protest vote.
So this is great. First of all, I want to say that I agree with Steve. I think the last 40 years have been horrible. I swear it's not because of my birth. I'm exactly... but I know being an activist the last 13 years have been incredibly hard. And so I salute you, and I stand on the, the idea that we stand on the shoulders of giants, in that people in this country, many in this room, have been working very hard to keep socialism alive and build the left during a period of which we've totally been getting our butts kicked, especially recently. But I think that cannot allow us to lower our sights. I'm going to go back to Debs, Eugene Debs, the socialist that Bernie Sanders, you know, he's a hero of his, and he's a hero of many of ours. He said the differences between the Republican and Democratic parties involve no issue, no principle in which the working class has any interest. He also said, I'd rather vote for something I want and not get it than vote for something I don't want and get it. And I want to insert that here because I think that one of the things it's very important, and I think that it's going to be a long, few months, year. I mean, the elections are not even, they're quite a ways away for us to debate this and argue this out because I think the pull of lesser evilism is going to be huge. Imagine if Donald Trump actually wins the Republican primaries. What that's going to mean in the pressure for us, for the left, for Bernie supporters, if Bernie doesn't win, to get behind Clinton. And what does that mean for the rest of us? So I just want to insert that into the conversation. And I also want to pull the conversation, or at least insert this, that I think some of this distorts where change comes from in the first place. That is so important. We have to remember the reason why FDR passed what he did, the reason why we had the gains that we did of those movements was because there were massive bottom-up struggle, massive strikes, etc. in this country. The reason why there were gains for African Americans in this country, for women, etc., was because of the social movements. And even though we're a little ways away from those, I think it's really important for us to remember that because otherwise, it gets very distorted about what Bernie can do. It's already in the headlines. People are talking Bernie Sanders being the person to shift Clinton to the left. She shifted to the left because there's been movements in this country. And lastly, I'll say we have won some gains building grassroots struggles, and some of it has been to independence, and that was the LGBT rights movement. We won same-sex marriage the last couple of years, and that was due to grassroots struggle. Those are things we can do that are outside of just elections that I think are incredibly important.
So if the speakers want to come back for a couple minutes again, that would be perfect timing. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, I guess I'll start. And I wrote down different questions that came up. I guess the first thing, I don't know how this will play well with this audience, but personally, to me, like being a Green, like it's not about a protest vote. It's 100% about being pragmatic, and I actually kind of, I kind of have a disdain for political idealism. Like I have no interest in like being politically idealistic. I want to be as practical and concrete as I can. So, again, for me, that means thinking long term. And yeah, like Jill Stein's not going to win the election now, most likely. But like that's not the point. It's more practical things like 5% of the vote so we can get federal matching funds. It's 2% of the vote so we can be on all state. And again, maybe that's not exciting because that doesn't sound like a social revolution. And again, we still need the movements on the streets. Like that's super important. The Green Party is just about the electoral aspect of that, and that's one aspect. There's many others, so I kind of wanted to make that point. And you had a really good question. I thought I kind of touched on that in my opening remarks, but because again, if Bernie won the nomination, there are a lot of things that wouldn't change. And you brought up the whole swing state thing. I mean, in any state that's not a so-called swing state, it still wouldn't really matter, So you could still vote for the Green or whoever else, and you can still help build an alternative that way. That was the main point there. I did want to kind of just to kind of speak to the question about is Jill Stein and the Green Party really the alternative? And I don't know, this answer might not sit well with people that are dogmatically like, it has to be completely socialist or it's nothing. But the Green Party is kind of a Big Tent party in the sense that it does attract socialists. It also attracts anarchists. It attracts disenfranchised progressive Democrats. So, it's a Big Tent in that sense, it's just kind of for the general left. But I think what the Green Party offers is I do think its platform it is inherently anti-capitalist platform, and beyond that, it also has a structure that socialists and other radicals can take hold of if they wanted to promote a more explicit anti-capitalist and working class agenda. So I'll wrap up my remarks there.
Perfect timing. Does any of the other speakers want to come back?
Sure. Let's see. A couple things I wanted to reply to. One, somebody mentioned a petition to say that Bernie supporters will not vote for Clinton. There are several such petitions. I don't have current numbers on how many have supported, signed on to them, but it's pretty significant. So, that's happening. Whether it's a flawed strategy to go Democrat. I mean, part of my role here, I feel like, is to be a voice for people who are maybe not yet socialists. And a lot of those people are really mollified by the fact that Bernie is running as a Democrat. Supreme Court justices are going to be nominated in the next administration. There are a lot of consequences, within the scope of what a lot of people think is politically possible, where it makes a big difference whether we get a Republican or not. And so, early in the Bernie Sanders campaign, the number one objection I heard was people who didn't realize he was running as a Democrat and said they would never vote for somebody like, who's going to spoil the election. So, I think that to this audience, running as a Democrat is a huge problem. But to a general audience, it opens a lot of doors. A lot of people who just wouldn't even have the conversation are now having the conversation. And I think that, to the plan B, what if Bernie loses? I think that, I personally have not put a lot of energy into, making a plan B. I'm working on plan A. But I think that, that's another place where I would look to you guys, people who have been building movements, who, have experience what to do when you lose an election.
Yeah, I would just make a couple of quick closing points. The big sheep herder factor that we have to grapple with in the labor movement is not Bernie, right? It's the unions that still claim 15, 16 million members that many of us in this room belong to. And it's those unions that are already, rushing to put our resources on the side of the Clinton or Biden corporate Democrat alternative. So this notion that Bernie is going to be the most problematic Pied Piper when he does what he's done every 4 years, which is to say, hey, the Democrats are a little better than the Republicans. I'm in Congress. I'm trying to get things done for veterans, for workers, for lots of other people. Better to have a Democrat in the White House than a Republican. That's been the extent of his ringing endorsement in the past. I don't know what he's going to say next year after this detour into the Democratic Party. I would just say that the ISO really needs to apply its wonderful critical faculties to the very challenging task of rebuilding the Green Party, if that is your chosen vehicle. Because I have found 10 years of trying to promote the idea of union endorsements of the Green Party in Massachusetts, very little traction. And we had a big Labor for Nader presence in Massachusetts in 2000. We had super rallies. We had a couple of national unions, the UE, the CNA, backing Nader. My own community, 10% of the folks voted for Nader in 2000. That did not translate into Green Party building over the next 10 years. Jill's a wonderful woman. She had twice as many votes running for governor of Massachusetts in 2002 as she got in 2010, an 8-year period in which you would think, coming off the Nader campaign, the party would have built some new momentum. Her last national vote total for president was less than Ralph got in 1996.
30 seconds.
So, I fully support the third-party route, but, rather than just dispense advice, get involved in an actual third party, build it, whether it's the Vermont Progressive Party or it's some local branch of the Greens, because they have a long way to go before the kinds of activists who are gravitating towards Bernie in the labor movement, in opposition to their own leadership, are going to see a wonderful woman like Jill as a viable political alternative for them and their union.
Okay, so I just want to respond to what Brother Steve was talking about and what's come up on the floor a little bit about this. I mean, it's really important to remember that Nader's campaign in 2000 that won almost 3 million votes I was someone, just so people know, I was not active at the time. I had friends who were like active in the global justice movement. I considered myself kind of a progressive. They sat me down and they argued with me about why I actually needed to vote for an independent party. That, you know, these are all the things you believe in, Regina. Vote for them. He's not going to win, but it is about actually building up an alternative and potentially getting the funding and all this kind of stuff. It meant it raised my expectations later, moving towards the anti-war movement. And when the U.S., you know, when September 11th happened, and actually that sort of what that meant for a break for the left in this country, we cannot even begin to like even digest what a severing that was and how much we're rebuilding since then. But there's also the issue that the Democrats got away with saying that it was Ralph Nader's fault that Bush won the election, and that was not true at all. The Democrats and the Republicans refused to count the votes that were thrown out in the sea in Florida and in back alleys and the bogs and so on, and African Americans were totally disenfranchised. And both parties refused to go after that because they wanted to uphold the legitimacy of a pretty broken system, and it meant that Bush got elected. Instead, many people who had supported Nader, then 2004, turned around and they, you know, teamed up with the Progressive Democrats of America and said, you know, basically have been talking about lesser evilism politics even since then, and that we can't build a third party in this country because it's just going to, in the end, we're going to get another Bush or whatever. So I think that that's really important to say, and I also think the strategy around David Cobb also was incredibly damaging. The idea that they ran candidates, you know, David Cobb against Nader later, and develop the whole safe state strategy. So I would just want to put forward, I don't think the ISO in any way, shape, or form like agrees with every single like strategy around what's happened. We support Jill Stein because it is an independent break. She's explicitly saying so, but there are huge problems. Lastly, I'll just say, I think any sort of mass party, workers' party, you know, the level of class struggle and social organization that has to develop in this country will then form mass parties that can be huge, you know, that can be real breaks for us. If we don't have unions striking at the point of production and we don't have social movements in this country to take on the power of the two parties, like, we are forever going to be like a little bit set back. And that's the challenge that we have. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge those challenges while also not giving up, you know, what we need to do today to kind of build the basis for that.
Okay, so please take a couple minutes to wrap up.
Let me make another reading recommendation. How many people here have read Lance Selfa's wonderful indictment of the Democratic Party as the graveyard of all social movements? Okay. We have a fellow here tonight, Brother Tom Gallagher, who is actually both a socialist and a former progressive member of the Massachusetts legislature, one of our best legislators back in the 1980s. He's written a very, very interesting historical account called The Primary Route. I think weighing in a very interesting way the options, you know, in these every 4-year circuses. Do we try to do, you know, what La Follette did in 1924, sort of the high point of, you know, organizing a progressive party against and outside the Democrats, what wasn't as successful with Henry Wallace in 1948, what certainly wasn't that great with Barry Commoner, a terrific guy with the Citizens Party in 1980. Our high point recently was Ralph in 2000, and Jill's efforts since then still ongoing. You know, but if you look, as Tom does, at the insurgencies within the Democratic Party, every 4 years trying to shake things up, pretty problematic, whether those were conducted by Upton Sinclair, you know, at the state level here in 1934, or Jackson or Kucinich or whatever. So if you're looking for, I think, an interesting practitioner's weighing of these options and what opportunities they present, I would highly recommend that you get Tom's book. I can't resist by closing by quoting Sinclair against Sinclair. Gina is quoting him religiously. And I agree that the 1934 End Poverty in California campaign, where Sinclair, you know, a writer, 30-year socialist, like Bernie, kind of made a sudden, unwanted detour into the Democratic Party, surprised the party poobahs by winning the nomination. And here's what he said when his own son was ragging on him for betraying socialism. So long as I was a socialist, I was just one more crank But when I call myself a Democrat, I become a man worth listening to. That was true then, when he got 37% of the vote. The party establishment abandoned him, but like every one of these electoral efforts, the End Poverty in California campaign, which once had hundreds of local chapters around the state, did not survive the campaign. So we're going to be real honest about this. There is no easy solution to building ongoing, long-term, independent political organization, whether we're putting all our eggs in the basket of a Bernie effort inside the Democratic Party for the moment, or a Green-style third-party effort. Because both, over the last 100 years, since we had a real mass-based socialist party, 100,000 dues-paying members, hundreds of elected public officials, have been pretty problematic, if we're honest about it.
Yeah, thank you. So just, again, I'm glad this panel has happened. I think this has been a real healthy discussion, and I think it's really important that we continue talking and working with each other as time progresses. I wanted to just kind of echo the point you made. It's absolutely necessary to continue building these movements outside elections, and I definitely get that. Obviously, a lot of my perspective is coming at it from the electoral realm, because that's the particular area that I'm working in. But if we don't have social movements on the streets, it doesn't really amount to anything. So with that said, I guess I want to wrap up my remarks by acknowledging that we absolutely need to put work into rebuilding the Green Party on all levels. With that said, it's an established structure. So there is a structure there that people can get involved with, can plug into, and can grow. So I think that's an important point to make. And I also think it's important to not overlook the accomplishments that have been made. Third-party alternatives actually do exist in many local communities, and that's really where it starts. It's about getting people elected on the school boards, on the city councils, on board supervisors, and then even state legislators. And I think if we think long-term, in the next 10 or 15 years, maybe we could find a strategic district where a Green could win state legislators. So at the moment, there are at least 66 Greens currently serving in elected office in California. Since the Green Party got established in California in 1990, almost 900 Greens have ran for office, and at least 334 have won. And every election, more and more Greens are winning local office. So I think that's important for people to realize. We don't always see it, but we are building something and we are winning. Greens also do get labor support and endorsements sometimes in local elections, and that's something, again, you can't discount that, because that's how you build those political relationships locally that can last, and that's how you help propel third-party candidates and social movements into higher office. And so, again, something we all need to think about. And I guess just the other point about Jill Stein. She got twice the votes as Cynthia McKinney and 3 times the votes as David Cobb. So, we are growing even in that realm too, and it's not as much as we need to, but just we also have to realize that there is growth. And I don't have any real awesome quote to just kind of leave things at, but again, this has been a really great discussion. Thank you all for having me, and look forward to talking to some of you afterwards.
Wow, this has been so great. I am so happy that I agreed to do this at the last minute. I've learned so much, and I'm going to have a lot to think about. I think that, I think it's a really important point that organizing around an election is different from organizing a movement. Organizing around an election is straightforward in a way that organizing a movement is not. And I would be really interested, those of you who do like Bernie enough, if you would be willing to work with us at Bay Area for Bernie to build this organization in a way that will be resilient to Bernie losing the primary if that should happen. To build this, movement around Bernie, this electoral campaign, in a way that does not live or die with Bernie himself. I think that that's I think even at a national level, there may be an opening for, as I said in my speech, the official Bernie campaign is trying to catch up with the grassroots activists. And so that creates a sort of vacuum that, people who want to organize a longer-term movement can step into. So I would love to hear your ideas. I would love to have you participate. Any suggestions you have for how we can, do this organizing in the Bay Area in a way that will both support Bernie and help lay the groundwork for long-term progressive social change and power. I think that was all I wanted to say right now. I think I'm going to get that book. Lots of great ideas. Thank you all so much.
Okay, cool. So my quote is, I'm going to quote myself.
What better authority?
Just joking. I just wanted to also say, can we give them a hand? And thanks to everyone who's come out tonight, too. So, since grade school, our education system and mass media teach us that our political participation is limited to voting every 2 to 4 years. And as has been described here today in this room within this debate, as socialists, history teaches us a totally different understanding of change. How the working class and oppressed have the ability to come together collectively to struggle, create gains, and to shape their own future. And it is there in this relationship between grassroots work and in social, economic, and political struggles that we can form organizing for electoral campaigns. So I think we should build electoral campaigns as an expression of our collective ground-up grassroots struggles. And I really agree as an idea, David's idea about getting a march through the Mission or whatever in the city against, rising cost of housing and so on. Like, that's exactly, I think, what we need to have happen. But I think within this process of the next couple, the year and a half, I think we need to continue to talk about how movements of our day should not allow themselves to be demobilized once again into the Democratic Party. So despite many of the ongoing disagreements that we may have, over the next year and a half, I just want to talk about what we can do together. So we have important climate justice struggles happening here in the Bay Area, including stopping coal from being exported in Oakland, and there's some pamphlets for that in the back. There's ongoing movement around low-wage struggles and raising the minimum wage, and I just mentioned housing. But there's also a big mobilization we're planning that I'm involved in, the NorCal Climate Mobilization, leading up to COP21 in Paris, and it's going to be on November 21st in Oakland, and I think it's going to bring out like 10,000 people. And so everyone here in this room that cares about those things, I think it was Beryl who mentioned about climate and ecological work, like sustainability, like you guys should totally come to the organizing meetings and get involved and mobilize Bernie people for this climate march. Also, there are still families fighting for justice for their loved ones who are murdered by police. And Black Lives Matter is still at the beginning stages of a civil rights movement, so we should be mobilizing for these events as they come up. And I just heard actually from someone that I met on the picket lines at the strikes that took place at the refineries that the nurses in Contra Costa Regional Medical Center are set to strike for 2 days on Tuesday. And then also there's the Howard Zinn Book Fair coming up in November, and there's the Labor Notes Conference. All of these are vital for rebuilding the left and talking about these very political ideas that were brought out today. And so I think it's in these movements and coalitions, large and small, that lay the basis for building alternatives and our power as the left, workers, and oppressed. And our goals have to be that this accumulates into a real workers' party when the conditions make that possible. And I think much of our success in these struggles will depend on our centering the politics of the need for independence from the two parties. So in the end, fighting for this alternative, even when it feels more like a dream, is what will be needed to achieve our end goal of social and political revolution. Woo!